Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Alice Robb. Alice, could you introduce yourself?
I'm a science writer, and I wrote a book called Why We Dream about the science of dreaming, which came out a few weeks ago.
I have the book here. I'm holding it up. Very nice cover. So this was a really interesting book about, I guess, a topic that's kind of like universal because everyone dreams, or at least we think everyone dreams. That was actually something I want to ask you maybe later on. But first, what drew you to this particular topic, and why did you want to write a book about it?
I I had always had a pretty vivid dream life, and remembered my dreams a lot, and just wondered about them. And uh, I had a phase in college when I got really into lucid dreaming, which is where you become aware within the dream that you're in a dream, and you're able to control what happens in the dream to a certain extent. So that I started doing exercises and meditations to induce lucid dreaming, and that deepened my interest. But I really had just I started working and writing about science during my first job, and I wrote a couple of short pieces about new research in dreams, and just felt like there was more there, and wondered what was going on and what we knew about it.
Right. The first part of the book is kind of a like history of our understanding of dreams,
Mhm.
and could you? We don't. I won't ask you to go through the entire thing, but can you kind of like go through some of the highlights, maybe like pre-Freudian, Freud and Jung, and then like post-Freudian era?
Sure. Um, so one of the paradoxes that I try to address in the book is, like, why did we stop caring about dreams? Like, I think it's safe to say that most of us think that dreams don't really matter, that we shouldn't really talk about them. But throughout history, most people have considered dreams important. And, you look to in the Bible, people are treating dreams as prophecies. And ancient doctors would ask their patients about dreams and use them in diagnosis and determining treatments. And then I found some of my favorite uh, stuff that I read were like dream diaries from 17th, 18th, 19th century in U.S. and Europe. You see like the founding fathers writing to each other about their dreams. You have I read one book about Civil War soldiers the letters they wrote home about their dreams, and you see them just as a part of life that's incorporated into their daytime lives.
Mhm.
And then even among people who are supposedly rational and skeptical minded people. And then in the early 20th century, we get Freud, who most people associate with dreams, certainly with psychoanalysis appropriately. And he really valued dreams and made them the center of psychoanalysis, and really the center of treatment, and believed that a lot of our neuroses could be uncovered by working through our dreams with a therapist. Should I
Yeah.
keep going through the?
Yeah. So I mean, why don't we just pause on Freud
Okay.
for a bit? So it seemed to me like in some ways he sort of brought a scientific lens to dreams in the first place, or one of the first people to bring a scientific lens to dreams, but also kind of like ruined the idea of dream studies for a long time because so many of his ideas were wrong.
Yeah, he has a really complicated role in the history of dreams, I'd say. I mean, also to back up for a second, I mean, the science of dreams definitely got off to a pretty late start for some reasons that are obvious. It's just hard to study dreams. Especially a lot of the early studies were just based on, you know, people's own reports of their dreams, which are not a perfect metric. And then, yeah, Freud really gave them this academic gloss and created a theory that was very, in some ways, intuitive and appealing, that dreams represent wish fulfillment and unconscious desires. But then we see later in the 20th century with the backlash to Freud, dreams kind of suffering along with with Freud's reputation. Mm-hmm. So people in psychology departments didn't want to be associated with Freud. They're trying really hard to get psychology taken seriously as a real science. And dreams feel like this kind of, mystical, tainted thing that has to be cast off.
Mm-hmm. And what about Carl Jung? How did he change Freud's ideas or change the course of the scientific understanding of dreams?
I mean, Jung was really into dreams too. I think they're still more associated with Freud, but Jung was famous for drawing pictures of his dreams, and he fought with Freud about the extent to which dreams are about sex. Another theory of Freud's that has really penetrated the culture and I think that we still haven't done away with is that dreams are all symbols in dreams are really sex symbols, and everything from climbing a ladder represents sex to a room is a woman because it has an entrance. Is one of my favorite. So Jung was less into that idea, and I'd say that's another thing that's held dreams back, is the way they've become taboo almost because of Freud.
Yeah. So there's a person who is in the Jungian tradition who has become perhaps the most famous intellectual of our era, and that's Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you follow the Jordan Peterson stuff at all, but I have a kind of
as closely as you do.
Yeah, perverse interest in him because he strikes me as so strange. But yeah, so he has he kind of follows some of the Jungian archetypal stuff, and but I don't know if I've never heard him talk about dream stuff. Do you know if he has any thoughts, such as they are, on dreams?
Jordan Peterson?
Yeah.
I have not come across him talking about dreams, but if he's a faithful Jungian, then he should, I guess. I mean, Jung believed that dreams were slightly different from Freud, that dreams show us we're trying to compensate for things that we're lacking. So that if you have a dream about... so one story that Jung tells is of a patient he had who was overly dependent on his father's approval. And so he had a dream about his father acting really irresponsibly, and his father was driving drunk. And then, they analyzed that to figure out that the man needed to gain more independence from his father. Mm-hmm. So his idea is more that you're in dreams, you're trying to balance out your psyche. Mm-hmm.
And part of this, well, not to focus on Jung overly, but he had this idea of the universal unconscious. Or is that right? Is that the right phrase?
Yeah. I mean, he had the idea of archetypes and the great mother figure and various others. I'm slightly rusty on Jung. It's funny, no one else is really asking about Jung.
Yeah, so Jung seems like an interesting figure, and there is this, he's reappeared in pop culture because of the massive popularity of Peterson, but the idea that in the dream you can connect to these kind of mystical universal tropes or ideas
yeah, so he had this idea of the collective unconscious, and this is that basically all these things that we can't quite explain, why have we developed rituals and religious symbols, and why do some of them have similarities across cultures, that it all dates back to this universal set of symbols that comes from ancient humanity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then,
So it's not really an idea that you can, test. It's more a mystical idea.
yeah. So then there was a period in which these ideas were influential, but then they fell out of favor. Was there specific people saying like this is all a crock of shit, or was it just like kind of faded away because the disciples weren't like pushing it?
Well, there was a group of psychoanalysts in New York who met in, I think, the 1960s to reevaluate Freud. And this is during, there's like the feminist reevaluation of Freud and examination of Freud's personal mistreatment of women and just Freud falling out of favor. And this group of psychoanalysts came together and said, okay, like now we have new, better ways to analyze our patients, free association, and we don't need to bother with dreams anymore. So they were sort of written out of the psychoanalytic guide.
Mm-hmm. So why do you can you describe the discovery of REM sleep, which was I didn't know anything about or know about the history of it, and is pretty unusual.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the study of dreams got off to a late start, but so did the study of sleep, which surprised me because now I think we all talk a lot about how important sleep is, and we know that without it we can't. It's much harder to absorb new information. Our health suffers, but all of that awareness is relatively new. So until the mid 20th century, most scientists thought that when you sleep, you just kind of shut down, not much to study there. And then in the 1950s, it's kind of a fluke. This PhD student was at the University of Chicago, was doing a project where he was sort of a trainee project that he'd been assigned, where he would look at babies while they were sleeping, and you're supposed to look at count track the rate of their blinking when they were awake and then observe them while they were asleep. And basically he noticed that there were these periods at regular intervals where their eyes would dart back and forth beneath their sockets. And he eventually came to correlate this with dream phases and found that the same thing happens with adults, and he called it rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, and that was really the beginning of the scientific study of sleep and the sort of proof that there's something going on that we can at least observe.
Mm-hmm. And then what was also so unusual that this was discovered by a graduate student, but also that he kind of had a career afterwards that didn't achieve it and kind of fizzled out and is kind of like a forgotten figure.
Yeah, this is something you see with a lot of the pioneers in sleep and dream research, that because it's been at various points such a small field and sort of a forgotten field, that someone this man, Eugene Aserinsky, didn't have much of a career. Someone else in his lab was William Dement, who went on to, he's been known as the father of sleep research. He's been at Stanford for decades and has his own lab, but Aserinsky just sort of faded away.
Like a dream. Sorry for that one. So what happens during rapid eye movement that is connected to dreaming? Is it that you are looking around in your dream at the different things, and that's why your eye is moving, or are those not connected?
So yeah, it's called the scanning hypothesis, which actually Eugene Aserinsky, he sort of intuited that might be what's going on, that your eyeballs are following the motions of things that are happening within the dream. And he tested it, in not the most definitive way, but he would ask people when they'd wake them up while their eyes were moving and ask what was going on and try and correlate that to, see that, okay, if they're having a really violent nightmare, are their dreams are their eyeballs moving more rapidly? And then, yeah, so William Dement went on to study that idea more. He found, there was one dream he found where like he would correlate the dream content to different movements. So like to the volley of a ping pong ball going back and forth over the table, or climbing up the stairs and moving your eyeballs. And there've been, it's not, I think it's still, there are aspects of this that are still up in the air, but there've been one study that I found convincing that showed that people who are blind sometimes see in their dreams. It depends on the age at which they lost their sight. So if you lost your sight before the age of around 5, then you tend not to have sight in your dreams. Whereas if you lose it after, you can still see in your dreams. And there was a study that found that the earlier people lost their sight in real life, the less eye movement they had during REM sleep.
Mm-hmm. So, help me if my chronology is wrong, but kind of along this time, so this is like 50s to 60s, dream science was like, a back burner issue. And then it was still kind of associated with some of these mystical paranormal ideas, and there was emphasis for a while among actual scientists on like psychically like beaming ideas into a dreaming person's mind, and or something along those lines. Can you talk about that era?
Yeah, this is a really fun chapter to research. But there were in the 60s, 70s, there were labs all over the place at UVA, at Princeton, investigating paranormal activity and telepathy. And there was a lab at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn where the psychologists would try to, like, they would put one person in a room, and then that person goes to sleep, and someone else tries to stares at a painting and tries to transmit the image to the person who's asleep. And they developed some pretty like impressive methodologies with like the pictures in the envelopes, and they were analyzing them. But I think most of those have not really stood up to further testing.
Right. So there was one guy in particular who did at least one study that like was rigorous and was able and like showed that this kind of paranormal, is that the right word for it? It's like extrasensory or something stuff is like did came out in the results, but then people who retested this idea were not able to replicate the findings.
Yeah. And another story I really liked was in the 60s in England, someone set up a premonitions bureau where he would try to collect dreams from people like all over the UK that were supposed to predict like natural disasters. And his idea was that we would be able to use this as a warning system. Right.
You tell the story in there that there was a kind of like industrial accident that was it in Wales that like a pile of coal ash or something collapsed onto a school and like 100 children were killed. So this huge tragedy, and then people started coming forward saying they had like before the accident they had like a dream about like blackness coming down or something along those lines, and that seemed to be prophetic of the event.
Yeah, so this person who was interested in predictive dreams, heard about this disaster and went out and solicited dreams from people, like asking anyone who dreamed about, a coal mine or basically any kind of nightmare to send them in. And collected some examples that were striking, but of course they were collected after the fact. So pretty hard.
Yeah, and this, is one example, and there's others in the books of in the book of, the various ways you can interpret any given dream or an event in any given dream and see it as, so Freud maybe saw it as representative of sex or something, and other people saw it as representative of a future event, and then I guess today we're most likely to think it's represents like a psychic conflict we're having, or some kind of interpersonal problem or an emotional problem, and maybe this is like a way to, the dream and interpreting it offers a way to understand it. So this is out of order, but this would be a good time to discuss the dream group that you participated in. Can you? I had never heard of this before, but it sounded interesting, and I wanted to go to one after hearing your description of it.
Well, in fact, it's a good thing because one of the guys who was a leader of these telepathy studies at Maimonides, after he left in the 80s, he developed this dream group model, and his idea he wanted to democratize psychotherapy and make it possible for people to analyze their own dreams in groups without, paying to go to an analyst. And he developed this model that is it feels not dissimilar from a writing workshop, if you've ever done one of those, in the way it's sort of ritualized and though a lot of it feels a bit like a passage analysis. So I'll first explain what happens. So, the dream group will be, maybe anywhere from 6 to 10 or 12 people. And at each session, just one person brings a dream and everyone analyzes just that dream. And it can be anything from a sentence to, a whole page. And you follow these structures. So, first the person reads the dream aloud, and then everyone asks the person questions to clarify what happened in the dream. So what Freud would call the manifest content, just what appears and what you experience. And then the dreamer for the next phase has to be silent, and everyone else talks about what they would feel if it had been their dream. So you imagine that you would have that dream and you would talk about like what, if there was a best friend in the dream, what would your best friend, what feelings would that evoke? Or, how does it relate to your life? And then you ask the dreamer questions about her own associations with the dream, and they hopefully have found that some of the other people's interpretations resonate or make her think of things she hadn't thought about. So it's not like a definitive way to interpret a dream, but it is what I found really great and surprising about it was just that it is possible to draw so much from a single dream. And just, I think people often wake up from their dreams and just feel overwhelmed and confused and don't know how to even begin trying to understand where it came from. And just that you can get so much out of a single dream, and that it's actually interesting and fun. I did one dream group that I thought was going to be, a few pages in my book, and then the group of friends that I did it with has continued to meet every month for more than 2 years. And we just do it because it's fun. So.
Yeah, like I said, it made me want to participate in one. Although I rarely remember my dreams and have never done like a dream journal, which I'm sure would help remember them better.
A lot of people in the dream group have found that that being in the dream group has helped them remember their dreams more, because they're just more motivated to. And as you started to mention before, even if you're someone who doesn't remember your dreams that often, you are still dreaming every night. And it's usually not that hard to improve your dream recall.
Right. So it's the case that people almost always don't remember the dream that they only remember the dream that is before they wake up, but you're having other dreams throughout the night.
Right. So you're having most of your dreams take place during REM phases, and you have a REM phase every time you go through a complete sleep cycle, so which is about every 90 minutes. And the REM phases get progressively longer over the course of the night. So the first one might be 10 or 15 minutes, and then later towards the morning it can be as long as an hour. And so if you are someone who just, goes to bed at bedtime and sleeps through the night and wakes up in the morning, then you're probably just going to remember the dream that you just woke from. But if you wake up to go to the bathroom, or if you just wake up because you don't sleep that well, you might have more opportunities to remember the dreams that you're having at different points in the night.
Mm-hmm. So the analysis of dreams, brings us back to Freud, and also, the Bible and Joseph's dream about the 7 cows or 14 cows or whatever. But I guess one thing I was wondering was there's this idea that if you have a dream about an object, then there's a universal meaning for that object. So that's a naive idea about what dreams mean. And I remember in the very early internet of the 90s on America Online, I found some dream meaning thing and was reading it, being oh, that's what that means. But it doesn't seem like that's true, and it seems like it's very open to interpretation. Maybe some things, there are some kind of tropes that have more consistent meanings, but other ones seem very open to interpretation to me. So if you see your father in the dream, well, maybe it represents actually your father, or maybe it represents authority, or you could cycle it out like an English an English class student would. And then there's one one theme in my dreams is over the years is my teeth falling out, and that's you write about how that's a very common one, and that has developed some accepted meaning related to anxiety or something, which would have surprised me based on my life history. But so I guess it's in some ways the dream group seemed really interesting, but also it kind of seemed well, everyone's just giving their interpretation, and you just pick whichever one you want, and that's fine. If that one, makes you happy or helps you in some way. But there's no actual, I don't know. I'm looking for there's no answer in the dream or key to unlock the dream or something. That's that one meant that you need to do X. That's never gonna happen. I don't know. So I'm kind of rambling, but
yeah. Well, I mean, it's. There's definitely no, there are lots of dream dictionaries and stuff like that online, but those are really more as you say, sort of astrology. But what you can do, and we all dream differently. We all have different dream sort of motifs and themes and characters that recur for us. But what you can do is if you really are paying attention to your own dreams and tracking them over time, you can notice if you have a certain dream that recurs, and if that tends to recur during times of stress. Or one thing that I thought was really interesting was there have been some analyses of the dream diaries from people who've kept them over their entire lives, and these have actually found that people tend to dream very consistently. So, I mean, I'm thinking of one analysis woman who kept a dream journal for 50 years, and there were certain patterns I think in 1 out of 10 dreams she was missing a bus, and her mother turns up in 1 out of 4 dreams. But then certain other things change, and those relate to what's going on in her life. So there are more dreams of, in middle age when she was getting divorced and feeling more lonely. There are more dreams that involve strangers rather than friends, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so the teeth falling out. So there are certain universal tropes, like flying and falling. And teeth falling out is one that is really interesting because it doesn't I mean, it's not something that happens a lot in our adult lives, but it is a really common, it's found across all cultures. And I mean, there have been lots of like funny psychoanalytic interpretations. One was that it represents a desire to return to the toothless state of babyhood. Mm-hmm. But more sort of recent theories are like that it can be related to grinding your teeth, or just like dental. There was one study that compared people who have recurrent dreams of their teeth falling out with people who have recurrent dreams of flying, and found that the people with the tooth dreams tended to have a little bit more anxiety in their lives, but also to have more dental problems.
I mean,
just reflect.
Yes, so it would make sense if you have dental problems that you're dreaming about your teeth falling out. But also, like when you said that it maybe in back 100,000 years ago when humans were coming into their like current stage of evolution, our teeth fell out more often because we didn't have modern dental care.
Well, there's one idea also that that there's an evolutionary idea about why we dream, which is that we're dreaming in order to rehearse for stressful real life events, and that our ancestors would use dreams to practice hunting and gathering, and that the idea is that this is why we have a lot of dreams that put us in like kind of primal environments. Like even if we live in the city, we might dream of being in the woods or like encountering animals that aren't really a part of our life. And so the teeth fit into this theory because, the idea is that like teeth were more pivotal to our survival in the old days.
Right. So if you like lost all your teeth, you might die soon in 10,000 years ago. So why if there's a possible idea of why we dream. The title of your book is that it kind of like is a, we're rehearsing future things and working things out. And we can talk about the Tetris study a little bit also. Why is there this surreal aspect to dreams when that is not a reflection of actual lived experience?
So there's when you're dreaming, your frontal lobes, which are the logic centers of your brain, are sort of dormant, and we're working in this wider network of association. So you're drawing, you're combining recent experience with stuff that you might not even remember from years ago. It's just sort of a looser time in our brains, which is also why a lot of people, artists and inventors, have used dreams to come up with new ideas that. You're also it's sort of on a spectrum with mind wandering and free associating during the day, the way that you're just thinking in a more creative, loose way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I guess maybe I'm trying to impose logic on it when it is inherently illogical, but it does, I don't know, like, did our ancient ancestors have like dreams of like a flying, saber-toothed tiger or something? And wouldn't it have made more sense for them not to have a flying saber-toothed tiger, but a land-bound saber-toothed tiger? Because that's what they would have had to deal with. So, but maybe I'm just thinking about it in a silly way.
There's like a lot of times in dreams, we're encountering scenarios that are much, much scarier than the ones that we encounter in the day. So if you are fighting with a saber-toothed tiger that can fly, maybe you wake up and you think, okay, well, still the saber-tooth is still scary, but at least they don't fly.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. It's it could be worse. So why don't we talk about the study that involved playing Tetris? Can you describe that study and what that taught us about our ability to like kind of learn and practice things while we're dreaming?
Yeah, so this was a study in the 90s, and it was important also just because it showed that it was one of the first times that dreams were really studied in the lab, and Robert Stickles, who led the study, was able to say something meaningful based on a lab study of dreams. So what he found was that first of all, he noticed that he was hiking a difficult trail on vacation, and noticed that as he was falling asleep, he was replaying parts of the trail that had been especially challenging, and thought, is there some way to study, to look at, like, are we going back to things that were difficult during the day? Are we practicing inner dreams? And then when he got back to, I think he was at Harvard then, where he is now, was looking for a way to do this in the lab, and a student mentioned that he would play Tetris during the day, and then at night he would dream of falling bricks, which is also an experience that I've had, which I took as a sign that I should stop playing Tetris so much. But so Stickles designed a study where he would have students play Tetris for a couple of hours a day for 3 days, and then record their dreams, and found that most of them were then dreaming of whether or not they were, so some might be dreaming of directly, like, falling bricks in exactly the way that they'd seen them during the day, but others were, dreaming of, like, they were sort of incorporate, like, the bricks might be shiny, or they might be incorporating sort of different experiences. And then he found that one of the other really interesting parts of this study was he also taught patients with amnesia who couldn't form new memories to play Tetris, and found that even they were having dreams about tiles or bricks, even though they couldn't consciously remember the rules to the game or what Tetris was. They were still having some kind of, like, learning going on in sleep, which could explain why they improved slightly, even though they weren't. They still had to be told again and again how to play.
Mm-hmm. So this implies that the one purpose of dreaming is, like, working out problems and rehearsing things that might later have a practical benefit, and that like that makes sense, similar to, like, thinking about hunting the saber-toothed tiger or something. So there's you have a chapter on nightmares on here, and I think those are, like, probably the more memorable dreams for most people. I have a couple nightmares that I remember very strongly. Why do we have nightmares? That seems on its face like to make less sense than why we have, like, pleasant dreams.
So one thing that when scientists started looking at dreams systematically in the mid-20th century, they found that dreams were just much more unpleasant than anyone had thought. Especially, I mean, Freud's whole idea was that dreams represent wish fulfillment, but then it turned out that dreams are much more, like, the most common feelings in dreams are anxiety, fear, guilt, helplessness. They were really, like, pretty nasty things. And I mean that's why these evolutionary psychologists went looking for an explanation of, like, why are we having these awful experiences, and hypothesized that we're doing it to prepare, and that by practicing the worst case scenarios. So if you think of something like, have you ever dreamed of turning up for an exam naked, or didn't take the class, or?
Yeah. I've had the version I have is there was a class I signed up for, and it's the end of the semester, and I forgot about it and never went to any of the classes, but now I'm going to get a failing grade.
Yeah. So, like, some people find that they have those dreams when they're stressed about something else. Like, I still have that dream, like, when I'm having a lot of exam dreams in the run-up to my book being released. And there, I don't know, I've personally found, like, there's a sense of relief when I wake up and it's like, okay, well, I have to launch a book, but at least I don't have to, like, take my chemistry exam. And there was actually one study that found that of French medical students that found that the more nightmares they were having about the exam, the better they actually performed.
Mm-hmm.
And that these nightmares were very common, and that like most people were even having them the day before the exam. But they seem to have a positive effect on performance.
Okay, so it's kind of like kicking you in the ass or something, saying like if you're still, I mean, it's interesting that like showing up naked for a classroom or the test that you didn't anticipate is like a universal dream, and also that people continue to have it long after they've left school, like that is so imprinted in our minds that we're still having it. One of my recurring dream themes is that my childhood home and my elementary school have like merged into one building, and I'm going from like the hallway, like one door will lead to my bedroom, one door will lead to the library or something like that. But it is like striking how these things stick in our minds. There's one thing that you mentioned one or two times in the book, but I wonder if you know more about it, which is like sleep paralysis and the kinds of dreams that people have under sleep paralysis.
So I actually don't really talk directly about sleep paralysis, which, sorry, maybe you can cut this question. It's just slightly different. It's like a slightly different thing. I talk about, I think it's like sleep terrors, which are, you're talking about the Dog Sog, the Hmong men, I think. Mm-hmm. So nightmares can have a real effect on the body. They can induce the same stress response that you might have if you encounter something frightening in the day. Your heart's racing, you might sweat. And there have been a few cases where people appear to have had like heart attacks preceded by really terrifying nightmares. The suggestion that there's a relationship between those two. And then there's just a lot of cultural beliefs about like demons that come in nightmares and that predict your death. And there was one sort of disturbing story that I came across of these men in the 1980s who had immigrated from Vietnam mostly to the Midwestern U.S. And there was a mysterious epidemic of otherwise healthy men in their 30s dying in their sleep. And I read this book by an anthropologist, Shelley Adler, who investigated and found that they had a belief that this sort of evil hag would come in your sleep and warn you, if you weren't fulfilling the proper ritual requirements, and that if she came 3 times, you would die. And the men who were dying seemed to they also had like cardiac problems, but they also had this belief in, so there's sort of a combination of physical and psychological.
Yeah, that part was crazy to read about, and the idea that this cultural belief could like lead directly to their deaths was surprising.
Yeah, I mean, they were also like experiencing a lot of stress and poverty, but it seems like it was sort of an interaction between the beliefs and the physical problems.
So sometimes, I usually or almost always read a book before going to bed or in bed before falling asleep, and I know when it's time to put the book away when like my consciousness starts to kind of slip into like surreality, or like I'll read a sentence and then I'll like think about it for a second and realize that couldn't have been on the page or something. Mm-hmm. So that can't be REM sleep because I'm like basically still awake or falling into unconsciousness, right? Or like is there any idea what's happening there?
So those are called hypnagogic images that you're experiencing, and they're not. You tend to not fall directly into REM sleep unless you're very sleep deprived, or you're selectively deprived of REM, which can happen if you're a recovering alcoholic or recovering from some other like drug that has artificially suppressed REM. But no, hypnagogia are a normal part of sleep. And some people use them actually to go into a lucid dream. You can train yourself to like follow those images with your mind while letting your body fall asleep. Mm-hmm. I've never actually managed to do this, but some people find that like a reliable way to induce lucid dreams.
Well, that's a good segue into the part of the book where you talk about lucid dreaming and bless you, and this guy LaBerge, who is one of the kind of guru experts on the topic, and you went to a retreat kind of event that he hosted in Hawaii, which sounded cool. Most people probably know what lucid dreaming is, but how would you define it if people haven't heard of it before?
So the simplest explanation is it's just when a lucid dream is a dream in which you're aware that you're in a dream. And there are sort of different levels of lucidity. So on a really basic level, you could just know that you're in a dream. On a, say, more advanced level, you can really like stabilize the dream and decide to take certain actions and exert control over the plot of the dream. I mean, one thing that does actually surprise people is I think sometimes people think of like Inception and they think, oh, lucid dream means you can just do whatever you want. But there's still like you still have to learn how to do things, like you have to practice if you want to fly, or, if you have to practice to prolong the lucid dream.
Yeah. So how did it kind of seemed like that in a way, the idea of lucid dreaming was like your entry point into this whole entire topic. In the first chapter, you talk about finding a book by LaBerge and find it really interesting. So, yeah, what is that? What does the lucid dreaming ability like say about why we do dream?
I mean, I haven't really thought about it that way. I mean, from the brain's point of view, it is a slightly different state. It's thought of as like a hybrid state of consciousness. So even though you are asleep, your frontal lobes, which are usually disengaged during dreams, are more active. I'm not sure what it says about why we dream. I mean, for most people who lucid dream, still the vast majority of your dreams are regular dreams. I mean, I met one person who seems to have had all of her dreams have been lucid since childhood. So like 3 or 4 times a night she has lucid dreams. But she's like been studied a few times, and I think she and people like her are pretty unusual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess like is the ability to lucid dream kind of like a like you use the spandrel metaphor that I think Stephen Jay Gould came up with. Like it's kind of like an accident that you can practice and take some measure of conscious control in your dream. Is that just an evolutionary accident, or like is there some like practical, like you can see a practical use for it of being able to like practice something?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of an open question. I mean, you could argue that it can't be that important because for most people don't really do it naturally and have to train themselves. But on the other hand, more than half of people do have a lucid dream at some point in their lives. It's not that uncommon. And people have been writing about it for thousands of years. Yeah, I mean, there are practical applications. You can kind of hack lucid dreaming and, as you say, use it to practice for things. I mean, there have been small studies of like people practicing a task in the lab, like tossing a coin into a cup, that kind of thing, and then taking a nap and having a lucid dream about it, and then like improving their performance. But I mean, I think those, and then there have been some real applications for like anxiety and just sort of like emotional, just the psychological benefits of, confronting, like summoning someone who you have, maybe someone who's died, who you have unfinished business with. You can like summon them in a lucid dream and achieve some sort of resolution that can feel very meaningful. Mm-hmm. The person who I mentioned who has lucid dreams every night had actually found that she could, she struggled with anxiety when she was younger, and she found that she could sort of hypnotize herself within a lucid dream to be less anxious. Like tell herself, she was in therapy at the time, and she was really struggling with anxiety and didn't know how to solve it. And then she decided to go into a lucid dream and say to herself, like, you will be anxiety free tomorrow, and found that had a very real effect on her life.
So if someone is interested in lucid dreaming and wants to learn more, what should they do?
So the first thing before you start trying to lucid dream is just to improve your recall for your regular dreams. So you can do that by keeping a dream journal. Is probably the easiest, most effective way. It could be a physical dream journal. It could be, you could speak your dreams into your phone, type them up on a computer, and just doing that every time, as soon as you wake up, like before anything you do to engage with the world outside your dream can sort of shake off the memory of the dream. And, if you wake up in the middle of the night, jot something down. And then dreams are just really susceptible to intention. If you say to yourself before bed, I want to remember my dream, sounds kind of woo, but it really works. And then just incorporating like thoughts of dreams into your daily life. So reading a book about dreams, for example. Talking about dreams, that'll all help. And then, so once you're remembering one or two dreams a night, you can start doing exercises that are more specifically designed to induce lucid dreams. So the main thing that Stephen LaBerge talks about in his book and on his retreat is doing what he calls reality tests. So that's when you ask yourself if you're awake or asleep. And he says that you should do this, 10 or 12 times a day, and do some kind of physical thing with your body to really check if you're awake. So you might, poke your hand with your finger, and if your finger goes through, then you're in a dream. Like plug your nostrils and see if you can breathe, that kind of thing. And the idea is if you do this enough, then you'll start doing it when you're asleep, and you'll ask yourself a question, and you'll know that you're in a dream. And there are various other things which Stephen LaBerge goes into in his books in much more detail than I do.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you mention reading about dreams, because a couple of nights ago when I was reading your book, I had the the longest and most coherent dream I've had in like a couple of years. It wasn't lucid. It was kind of a normal dream, more or less. But I remembered it. It lasted a long time.
I mean, a lot of people tell me that, like, after talking to me about my book or seeing me, they'll have a more vivid dream. Interesting effect to have on people's psyche.
for sure. That's more power than most authors have, I guess. So maybe one more question. This one is a little odder. So when I was talking about the book with my wife, and we're talking about dreams, and she said in her dreams, she knows it's a dream in the dream, and she feels like it's more like watching a movie. So there's like a disconnection between her like self in the dream and what's happening. I think that's probably more unusual. So like my dreams is more like I'm on a like amusement park ride where I'm kind of like strapped in, and things seem to be happening to me directly. And although I've had like 2 lucid dreams in my life, it's almost always, just like I'm along for the ride and don't seem to have any volition and believe that what's happening in the dream is real at the time. Whereas she according to her, doesn't, knows it's a dream, although she doesn't have like, I don't know if she's had like lucidity moments, or at least she's not like working on that. So is that like more unusual, that kind of my wife's kind of dreaming?
That she's aware that it's a dream.
Yeah, I mean, more like a movie where it's, she knows it's a dream and just kind of like passively watching.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that does sound like it's on the lucidity spectrum. I mean, I would be curious if she started doing any of the lucid dreaming exercises, if like, it sounds like she probably has a lot of aptitude for lucid dreaming. The idea of watching dream and not participating in it, I haven't heard about as much. The only thing that comes to mind is a study of children that found that becoming like an active player in your own dreams corresponded with crossing a certain cognitive threshold. Mm-hmm. But that tended to happen around age 10, so I imagine that's not relevant for your wife. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, our dreams are very idiosyncratic, and it's definitely a lot that we still don't know.
Yeah, that's along with like our inner monologue and consciousness, it's one of the things that like you only have access to your own, truly, yeah. And you could never really experience anyone else's. So do you have anything else you want to say about the book or dreams in general?
I mean, I guess if I have one takeaway, it would just be that even if you think you're not dreaming, you are dreaming, and it takes very little effort to remember your dreams and see what's going on during the 2 hours that you're doing it every night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the idea that like that you're having all these dreams that are just like that for the vast majority of people just like are evaporating, and and then you have no memory of them, but they did happen, is like kind of crazy to think about.
Right. I mean, just what ideas you're coming up with and forgetting, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the book is Why We Dream: The Transformative Power of Our Nightly Journey. So you have a website and you're also on Twitter. Those links will be below, but do you want to say what those links are for people who want to check out more of your work?
AliceRobb.com, and my Twitter is @AliceLRobb.
Cool. So thanks so much for coming on and talking about the book. I enjoyed it a lot. I encourage people who are interested in this topic to check it out. And and we all have dreams. So if you don't think they're important, it's still like part of your life experience. So thank you, Alice. Thank you to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.